The Missouri sun burned mercilessly over the small town of Liberty when Sarah Washington stepped off the military train for the last time. Her worn boots touched the dusty ground with a dry sound that echoed like a gunshot in the morning silence. At 24, Sarah carried on her shoulders 3 years of military service during the Civil War, 3 years in which she had disguised herself as a man to fight for the Union. The station was nearly empty, except for a few merchants loading goods and a group of Confederate veterans who watched her with hostile stares. Sarah adjusted her hat over her short hair and walked toward the town center, carrying only a worn military pack and a small amount of money, all that remained after being dishonorably discharged from the army. "Damn little negress," muttered one of the men at the station. "Should have stayed in the slave quarters where she belongs." Sarah pretended not to hear, but her fists instinctively clenched. During the war, she had been Soldier Joseph Washington, recognized for courage in battle and deadly accuracy. Now, with her true identity discovered, she had been expelled like a criminal, despite her impeccable service record. The town of Liberty simmered with typical post-war tension. Wooden houses lined the main street, their facades faded by sun and dust. Horses tied to posts swished their tails to ward off flies, while men in hats and women in long dresses moved through the commercial establishments. Sarah entered the saloon, the Golden Horseshoe, the only place that seemed to accept people of all colors, mainly because money had no color. The interior was dark and smoky, with poker tables scattered throughout and a bald bartender cleaning glasses with a questionable rag. "What'll it be?" asked the man without looking up. "Whiskey and information," Sarah replied, placing some coins on the counter. The bartender served the drink and finally looked at her. "What kind of information?" "Work. Anything honest." A harsh laugh came from a nearby table. "Honest? For your kind." The man speaking was tall and thin, with scars on his face and eyes cold as ice. "Listen here, girl. This ain't no place for Negroes who think they're better than others." Sarah turned slowly, maintaining the calm she had learned on battlefields. "Sir, I'm not looking for trouble. Just work." "Well, you ain't gonna find none here," said another man, shorter and stockier, "unless you know how to wash clothes or cook." The comment provoked laughter at the table. Sarah felt her blood boil but forced herself to maintain composure. She had faced Confederate cannons. She wouldn't be intimidated by barroom bullies. "Actually," said a deep voice from the doorway, "maybe I have something for her." Everyone turned. At the saloon entrance stood a medium-built man with brown hair and penetrating eyes. He wore simple but good quality clothes, and there was something about his presence that made the entire saloon fall silent. "And who the hell are you?" asked the tall man from the table. "Just a traveler," replied the newcomer, walking to the counter. "But I heard this young lady is looking for work." He addressed Sarah directly. "Can you shoot?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Yes, sir." "Ride?" "Since childhood." The man nodded. "I need someone brave for a special mission. Pays well." The bartender whispered something low, but the stranger ignored him. Sarah sensed there was something dangerous about this man, but her desperate situation didn't give her many options. "What kind of mission?" she asked. "I speak better outside," he said, leaving money on the counter. "How about meeting me at the abandoned church at the end of town at sunset? There we can talk with more privacy." Sarah nodded slowly. She didn't have many alternatives. As the stranger left, she didn't notice the worried looks from other patrons. The bartender approached her discreetly. "Girl," he murmured, "you don't know who that man is, do you?" "No, sir." The man looked around nervously before whispering, "That's Frank James. And if he's here, his brother Jesse can't be far away." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Everyone in Missouri knew the James brothers, ex-Confederates who had become the most feared outlaws of the West. But she had already made her decision. She had nowhere to go, and the job offer, even if dangerous, was her only hope. At nightfall, the elongated shadows of trees created sinister shapes in the abandoned church cemetery. Sarah arrived at the agreed location with her hand near the revolver she carried hidden under her coat. The church, with its broken windows and peeling paint, looked like a skeleton against the orange evening sky. Frank James was there, accompanied by 2 other men. One of them, younger with eyes of murderous coldness, could only be Jesse James. "So this is the famous Negro soldier woman," said Jesse, studying Sarah from head to toe. "I heard you fought in the war disguised as a man." "That's true," Sarah replied, maintaining her upright posture. "And that you were expelled when they discovered your true nature." Sarah didn't respond, but her eyes showed no submission. Jesse smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perfect. I need someone with your Specific abilities. Someone the army abandoned and society rejects. Someone with nothing to lose. What kind of work? Asked Sarah. We're going to rob a bank, Jesse said simply. The First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. A big job that'll bring in a lot of money. Your share would be enough for you to start a new life far from here. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had sworn to defend the law during the war, but now that same law had rejected her because of her skin color. Why me? She asked. Because you're invisible, said Frank. A Negro woman doesn't draw attention. You can enter the bank, study the security, map escape routes. And when the time comes, you can fight like any man. Jesse moved closer. What do you say, Sarah Washington? Will you join us, or will you starve to death trying to be honest in a world that doesn't want you? Sarah looked at the three men, then at the ruined church behind them. Her military life had ended in disgrace, and her future seemed as dark as that abandoned building. But there was still something inside her that resisted the idea of becoming an outlaw. I need to think, she said finally. Jesse laughed quietly. You have until tomorrow morning. Meet us here at sunrise with your answer. But remember, Sarah, nobody who rejects an offer from the James brothers usually lives to tell the story. The threat hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Sarah nodded and walked away, heading back to town under the faint light of the crescent moon. Her destiny was in her own hands, but all options seemed to lead into darkness. That night, Sarah could barely sleep in the rented room of a dirty boarding house. Through the window she could see the stars that used to guide her during military marches. Now, however, they seemed like silent witnesses to her fall from grace. Before we continue, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. We love knowing where our viewers are from. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It truly helps us keep going. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Now enjoy the story. Dawn arrived like a judgment. Sarah woke before sunrise, her body tense and her mind full of contradictory thoughts. She had spent the night turning over her decision like a coin that never landed on the right side. Sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, she looked at the Colt revolver she had managed to keep after being discharged from the army, a reminder of better days and now, perhaps her only protection. The boarding house where she was staying was in the poorest part of town, where ex-slaves, immigrants, and other outcasts from respectable Liberty society lived. Through the corridors, she could hear crying hungry children and whispered conversations of adults discussing how to find work in a world that didn't want them. Sarah went down to the small parlor where the owner, a middle-aged black woman named Martha, served watery coffee and stale bread to guests. Sleep poorly, child? Asked Martha, noticing Sarah's dark circles. Just thinking about the future, Sarah replied, accepting the coffee cup. Martha approached and lowered her voice. I heard you talked with the James boys last night. Sarah almost dropped her coffee. How did you know? Honey, in this town everybody knows everything. And I know that a girl like you, with your history, must be going through hard times. Martha sat beside Sarah. Let me tell you something, I've been desperate too. But making deals with men like Jesse James is like making a pact with the devil. It might seem like the only way out, but it always ends up costing more than you can pay. And what's the alternative? Asked Sarah, bitterness evident in her voice. Starve to death? Accept any humiliation just to get laundry work. The alternative is to fight the right way, said a new voice. Sarah turned and saw a tall black man entering the boarding house. He wore simple but clean clothes and carried a sheriff's star on his chest. It was Samuel Brooks, the only black deputy in the region, appointed during Reconstruction. Deputy Brooks, Martha greeted. What brings you here so early? Actually, I came to talk with Miss Washington, he said, removing his hat. May I sit? Sarah nodded, curious and suspicious at the same time. I know who you are, Brooks began. Sarah Washington, former Union soldier, discharged when they discovered you were a woman. I also know the James brothers made you an offer last night. How? I have informants, he said simply. Listen, Sarah, I know you're going through difficulties. But joining those criminals isn't the answer. Then what is? Asked Sarah, already tired of hearing advice without practical solutions. Brooks leaned forward. Work with me. I need someone with your skills for a special mission. The James gang has been terrorizing this region for months. They rob banks, trains, kill innocents. I need someone who can infiltrate, discover where they hide when they plan their next robbery. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You want me to be a spy? I want you to be a hero again, Brooks said firmly. The federal government is offering a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of Jesse James. Enough money for you to buy land, start a business, live with dignity. And if they discover me? If they find out I'm working with the law? Brooke's expression became grave. Then you'll probably die. I won't lie to you about that. But Sarah, you have a choice here. You can become like them, a criminal who preys on innocent people, or you can use your skills to protect those who can't protect themselves. Martha placed a maternal hand on Sarah's shoulder. Child, I've known Deputy Brooks for 2 years. He's an honorable man. If he says there's another way, maybe you should listen. Sarah looked between the two of them, then out the window where the sun was beginning to rise. In a few hours she would have to give Jesse James her answer. But now she had 2 paths before her, and both seemed equally dangerous. If I agree to work with you, she said slowly, what exactly would you want me to do? Accept Jesse's offer, Brooks replied. Join his gang, but as my informant. Learn their plans, their hideouts, their weaknesses. When the time is right, we'll coordinate with federal marshals to capture them. You're asking me to betray people who trust me. I'm asking you to stop murderers, Brooks countered. Sarah, these men aren't just bank robbers. Last month they killed a bank teller in Kansas, a young father with 3 children. 2 weeks ago they shot a train conductor who tried to protect passengers. These aren't Robin Hood figures stealing from the rich to give to the poor. They're cold-blooded killers. Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest like a lead blanket. Both options required her to risk her life, but for very different causes. How do I know you won't abandon me like the army did? She asked. Brooks reached into his vest and pulled out an official document. This is a federal commission. If you help capture the James gang, you'll not only receive the reward money, but also a full pardon for any crimes you might need to commit while undercover. Additionally, I've arranged for you to receive an honorable discharge certificate to replace the dishonorable one you received. Sarah's eyes widened. An honorable discharge would change everything. It would restore her dignity, allow her to apply for veteran benefits, prove to the world that she had served her country with honor. This is real? She asked, examining the document. As real as the sunrise, Brooks confirmed. Sarah, your country failed you once. Let me give you a chance to serve it again, the right way this time. Martha squeezed Sarah's hand. Child, this man is offering you a chance to be the hero I know you are inside. Sarah looked out the window again. The sun was now fully visible, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. In the distance, she could see the abandoned church where Jesse James waited for her answer. If I do this, she said slowly, I want your word that innocent people won't be hurt. You have it, Brooks replied immediately. And if something goes wrong, if my cover is blown, you'll do everything possible to get me out alive. I give you my word as a fellow soldier and a man of God. Sarah took a deep breath and made her decision. Then I'll do it. But I'll need a signal, a way to communicate with you without arousing suspicion. Brooks smiled for the first time. I've already thought of that. There's an old oak tree behind the church. If you need to pass information, leave it in a hollow on the north side. I'll check it every evening. And if I need immediate help? Fire 3 shots in rapid succession. I'll have men stationed around town listening for that signal. Sarah stood up, checking her revolver one last time. Then I suppose it's time to become a criminal. As she walked toward the abandoned church, Sarah felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of her life, but for the first time since leaving the army, she felt like she was fighting for something worthy again. The sun climbed higher in the Missouri sky, and Sarah Washington walked toward her destiny, not knowing that her decision would change not only her own life, but the course of American history in the West. The abandoned church stood like a monument to broken promises against the morning sky. Sarah approached with measured steps, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The decision had been made, but doubt still gnawed at her insides like a persistent wound. Jesse James was waiting exactly where she had left him, but now she could see him more clearly in the daylight. He was younger than she had expected, probably no more than 21, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had killed many men. Frank stood beside him, methodically cleaning a Winchester rifle, while the third man, whom she now recognized as Cole Younger, sharpened a knife with deliberate strokes. Well, Jesse said as she approached, his voice carrying a mocking tone. Our little soldier returns. I was beginning to think you'd decided to run away like a scared rabbit. I don't run from anything, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I'm here to accept your offer. Jesse's smile was sharp as his knife. Smart choice. Though I suspect it wasn't really a choice at all, was it? When the world spits on you, sometimes the only option is to spit back. Frank looked up from his rifle. You understand what you're getting into, girl? This isn't some game. Once you're in, there's no getting out. We don't accept deserters. I understand, Sarah said, meeting his gaze directly. But I want to know exactly what my role will be. Your role, Jesse said, beginning to pace like a predator circling prey, is to be our eyes and ears. Tomorrow you'll take the train to Northfield, Minnesota. You'll pose as a domestic worker looking for employment. Study the bank, learn the routines of the guards, the habits of the employees. Find out when they receive large money shipments. Cole Younger spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from tobacco and whiskey. And if anyone gets suspicious? Then you use that, Jesse said, pointing to Sarah's hidden revolver. I heard you can shoot as well as any man. Is that true? Sarah nodded, remembering the long hours of training during the war, the battles where her marksmanship had saved her fellow soldiers' lives. Now those same skills would serve a very different purpose. Good, Jesse continued. Because bank jobs aren't like target practice. People shoot back and they shoot to kill. You hesitate for even a second and you're dead. Frank handed her a small leather pouch. There's money for the train ticket and lodging. Don't spend it on luxuries, blend in, look poor but respectable. A Negro woman with too much money draws attention. Sarah took the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. It was more money than she had seen in months, but it felt like 30 pieces of silver in her hands. How long do I have? She asked. 2 weeks, Jesse replied. That should be enough time to learn everything we need to know. Then you'll return here and we'll plan the robbery. And after that? Jesse's laugh was cold as winter wind. After that, you'll be rich enough to disappear forever. Buy yourself a nice little farm somewhere far away, maybe out in California. Live quietly and never mention our names again. Sarah nodded, but internally she was memorizing every detail of the conversation for her report to Deputy Brooks. 2 weeks to gather intelligence, then a return to Liberty for planning. It would give Brooks time to coordinate with federal marshals. One more thing, Frank said, stepping closer. This goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. If you betray us, if you even think about betraying us, I'll hunt you down personally. And when I find you, dying will be a mercy I probably won't grant. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. I have nowhere else to go. No one else will have me. Why would I betray the only people offering me a future? It was partly true, and that partial truth made her lie more convincing. Jesse seemed satisfied with her response. Excellent. The morning train leaves at 8. Be on it. As Sarah turned to leave, Jesse called after her. Oh, and Sarah? Welcome to the James Younger gang. Try not to get us all killed. The walk back to town felt like a march to execution. Sarah's mind raced with the magnitude of what she had committed to. She was now officially an outlaw, or at least pretending to be one. The irony wasn't lost on her. After being kicked out of the army for being a woman, she was now pretending to be a criminal to serve justice. At the boarding house, Martha was sweeping the front steps when Sarah arrived. Child, you look like you've seen a ghost, Martha observed. Everything all right? I'm leaving town tomorrow, Sarah said simply. Going to Minnesota to look for work. Martha stopped sweeping and studied Sarah's face carefully. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. I see. Well, you be careful up there. Minnesota's got harsh winters and folks can be even colder than the weather. Sarah understood the underlying message. Martha knew more than she was letting on, but she also knew when not to ask questions. That afternoon, Sarah made her way to the oak tree behind the church. Finding the hollow Deputy Brooks had mentioned, she left a brief message detailing Jesse's plan and her departure for Minnesota. It felt strange to be passing intelligence again, like slipping back into an old uniform that no longer quite fit. The train station the next morning was busier than usual. Sarah sat on a wooden bench, her few possessions in a small carpet bag, watching families say their goodbyes and businessmen checking their pocket watches. To any observer, she looked like just another colored woman traveling north to find domestic work, exactly the disguise Jesse had planned. The train to Minnesota was a modest affair, with segregated cars that reminded Sarah once again of her place in society. She found a seat in the colored car, surrounded by other black travelers heading north in search of better opportunities. Many were former slaves who still carried the psychological scars of bondage, while others were free blacks seeking to escape the increasing hostility of the post-war South. As the train pulled away from Liberty, Sarah watched the Missouri countryside roll past the window. Rolling hills covered with oak and hickory trees gave way to farmland, then to the bustling industrial cities of Kansas City and St. Louis. With each mile, she moved further from everything familiar and deeper into a dangerous game whose outcome she couldn't predict. A middle-aged black woman sitting across from her struck up a conversation. "First time heading north?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "Looking for work in Minnesota." "Me too," the woman said. "My name's Ruth. Ruth Peterson. I'm hoping to find work as a seamstress. What about you?" "Domestic work," Sarah said, using her cover story. "I can cook, clean, take care of children." Ruth nodded approvingly. "That's good honest work. Though I hear tell there's some rough characters up in Minnesota. Bank robbers and such. You be careful, young lady." "If only you knew," Sarah thought to herself. "I'll be careful," she said aloud. As the train continued north, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. A year ago she had been a respected soldier fighting for the Union cause she believed in. Now she was a spy, infiltrating a criminal gang to serve that same cause in a different way. The methods had changed, but perhaps the mission remained the same, protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. Night fell as the train crossed into Iowa, and Sarah dozed fitfully in her seat. In her dreams she was back on the battlefield, but instead of Confederate soldiers she was fighting shadowy figures who kept changing into different people. Sometimes Jesse James, sometimes the officers who had dishonorably discharged her, sometimes faceless representations of a society that had rejected her. She woke as the train pulled into a small Iowa station for water and fuel. Through the window she could see the vast prairie stretching endlessly under a canopy of stars. Somewhere out there, Deputy Brooks was probably checking the oak tree for her message. Somewhere else, Jesse James was planning a robbery that she would help him execute, even as she worked to ensure his capture. The complexity of her situation hit her anew. She was serving justice by pretending to serve injustice, protecting society by appearing to threaten it. It was a precarious balance, and one wrong step would mean death, not just for her, but potentially for innocent people in Northfield who had no idea what was coming their way. As the train resumed its journey north, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to the memory of all the soldiers who had died fighting for freedom. She would see this mission through no matter the cost. The war might have ended, but her service to justice was far from over. The first pale light of dawn was beginning to appear on the eastern horizon as the train approached the Minnesota border. Sarah Washington, former Union soldier, current outlaw spy, and reluctant hero, was about to enter the most dangerous phase of her life. But she was ready for whatever lay ahead. Justice, after all, was worth any sacrifice. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah arrived in Northfield, and autumn was painting the Minnesota landscape in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. She had established herself as Mary Johnson, a quiet domestic worker employed by Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a wealthy widow who lived 2 blocks from the First National Bank. The role had given her perfect cover to observe the bank's daily operations while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary working woman. Every morning, Sarah walked past the bank on her way to market, noting the arrival times of employees, the patterns of the security guards, and the flow of customers. She had identified the vault location, the back exit, and most importantly, the bank's weekly routine of receiving large cash shipments every Thursday morning. The intelligence she had gathered was damning in its detail. The bank was poorly guarded, with only 2 elderly security guards who spent more time drinking coffee than watching for trouble. The local sheriff was often out of town, leaving law enforcement in the hands of a young, inexperienced deputy. It was, Sarah realized with growing dread, the perfect target for the James gang. Her reports to Deputy Brooks, left in coded messages at various locations around town, had been thorough and professional. But with each passing day the moral weight of her position grew heavier. She was providing information that would help criminals rob innocent people, even if her ultimate goal was their capture. The internal conflict reached its peak on a crisp October morning when she encountered 8-year-old Tommy Wilkins outside the bank. The boy's father was the head teller, and Tommy often came to walk his father home for lunch. He had struck up a friendship with Mary Johnson, and would always wave enthusiastically when he saw her. "Miss Mary," Tommy called out, running up to her with a gap-toothed grin. "Pa says the bank got a big shipment of money yesterday. Says it's more than they've ever had before." Sarah's blood ran cold. Tommy's innocent comment confirmed her worst fears. The James gang had chosen the perfect time to strike. The bank was holding more money than usual, which meant more innocent people would be at risk during the robbery. That's nice, Tommy," she managed to say. "You should probably not talk about bank business with strangers though." "But you're not a stranger, Miss Mary. You're my friend." The boy's trust hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was an innocent child who saw her as a friend, while she was secretly planning to put his father in mortal danger. The contradiction nearly broke her resolve. That evening, Sarah found herself in the small room she rented above a bakery, staring at the coded message she needed to send to Deputy Brooks. The intelligence was complete. The bank would be holding approximately $50,000, the security was minimal, and Thursday morning would be the optimal time to strike. All she had to do was encode the information and leave it at the designated drop point. Instead, she found herself writing a different message entirely. Cannot proceed. Too many innocents at risk. Find another way. But even as she wrote the words, Sarah knew there was no other way. The James gang was coming to Northfield whether she helped them or not. Her intelligence wasn't enabling the robbery, it was ensuring that law enforcement would be ready to stop it. Without her information, Jesse James would strike like a bolt of lightning, rob the bank, and disappear before anyone could react. With it, Deputy Brooks and the federal marshals would be waiting. Sarah tore up the first message and wrote the intelligence report as planned. Then she added a personal note: many innocents in the bank during target time. Minimize casualties if possible. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Northfield. Sarah was hanging laundry behind Mrs. Whitman's house when she spotted familiar figures riding into town. Jesse James, Frank James, Cole Younger, and 3 other men she didn't recognize dismounted at the hotel and checked in under false names. They were early. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the timeline had accelerated. Her last message to Brooks had indicated the gang would arrive in 2 days. If he wasn't prepared, if the federal marshals weren't in position, the robbery would succeed and innocent people would die. She waited until nightfall, then slipped out of the boarding house and made her way to the emergency signal location Brooks had established, an old barn on the outskirts of town. According to their arrangement, 3 lantern flashes would summon him for an emergency meeting. Sarah lit the lantern and flashed it 3 times, then waited in the cold darkness. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she heard the soft sound of hoofbeats approaching. "Sarah?" Brooks' voice called softly. "Here," she whispered back. Brooks emerged from the shadows leading his horse. "What's wrong?" "Your signal said they weren't coming for 2 days. Plans changed. They're already here, checked into the hotel this afternoon. I think they plan to hit the bank tomorrow morning." Brooks cursed under his breath. "The federal marshals aren't supposed to arrive until tomorrow evening. I've only got 3 deputies and one of them is greener than spring grass. What do we do?" Brooks was quiet for a long moment, weighing their options. "We proceed as planned. I'll position my men around the bank. When the shooting starts, you get down and stay down. Don't try to be a hero." "What about the civilians in the bank?" "We'll do our best to protect them. But Sarah, you need to understand, once this starts, there's no controlling it. People are going to get hurt, maybe killed. That's the nature of what these men do." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "Maybe we should warn the bank, tell them to close tomorrow. And tip off the gang that we know their plans? No, that would only make things worse. They'd either postpone and strike when we're not ready, or they'd start shooting immediately out of paranoia." Sarah knew he was right, but it didn't make her feel any better. "There's something else," Brooks continued. "After tomorrow, whether we succeed or fail, your cover will be blown. The James gang will know they had a spy, and it won't take them long to figure out it was you. You'll need to disappear, start a new life somewhere far from here." The reality of her situation hit Sarah fully for the first time. Even if they succeeded in capturing the James gang, she would lose everything she had built in Northfield. Mrs. Whitman, Tommy Wilkins, even the small sense of community she had found, all of it would have to be abandoned. "I understand," she said quietly. Brooks reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. "Your payment and the promised discharge papers. Whether or not we get Jesse James tomorrow, you've fulfilled your part of the bargain." Sarah took the envelope but didn't open it. The money and official vindication she had wanted so desperately now felt insignificant compared to the lives that would be at stake in the morning. "Brooks," she said as he prepared to leave, "promise me you'll do everything possible to protect the innocent people." "I promise," he replied. "But Sarah, promise me something in return. When the shooting starts, don't try to save everyone. Don't let yourself become another casualty. You've done enough." As Brooks disappeared into the darkness, Sarah made her way back to town. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional light visible in windows. Somewhere in the hotel, Jesse James was probably planning the details of tomorrow's robbery, unaware that his former soldier spy was having second thoughts about her role in his capture. Sarah spent the night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every scenario she imagined ended in violence and bloodshed. By dawn, she had made peace with her choices. She had agreed to help capture dangerous criminals, and she would see it through regardless of the personal cost. The morning of the robbery dawned clear and cold. Sarah performed her usual routine, walking past the bank on her way to market. She noted the positions of Brooks' deputies, one in the barbershop across the street, another in the general store next door, and Brooks himself in the sheriff's office with a clear view of the bank's front door. At exactly 10:30 a.m., as the bank was reaching its busiest point of the morning, 6 men rode up to the First National Bank of Northfield. Sarah watched from across the street as Jesse James, Frank James, and Cole Younger dismounted and walked calmly toward the bank entrance. 3 other gang members remained on horseback, ready to cover their escape. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched Jesse push open the bank door. This was it, the moment that would determine whether her months of dangerous deception had been worth it. "Nobody move." Jesse's voice rang out from inside the bank. "This is a robbery." The sound of gunfire erupted almost immediately. Sarah saw Deputy Brooks burst from the sheriff's office, rifle in hand, as his men emerged from their hiding places. The 3 mounted outlaws began shooting at anyone who moved, while the sounds of struggle came from inside the bank. Then Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze, the terrified scream of a child. Tommy Wilkins was inside the bank. Without thinking, Sarah abandoned her cover and ran toward the bank. She had her revolver in hand before she even realized she had drawn it. Brooks' warning to stay down and avoid becoming a hero was forgotten in the face of an innocent child's terror. She burst through the bank's front door to find chaos. Jesse James was at the counter, demanding money from the terrified teller Tommy's father. Frank James was holding several customers at gunpoint, including Mrs. Whitman and little Tommy, who was crying for his father. Cole Younger stood near the vault, struggling with an elderly bank guard who was trying to be heroic despite being clearly outmatched. "Let the child go," Sarah shouted, her revolver trained on Frank James. Everyone in the bank froze. Jesse's eyes widened in recognition and fury. Well, he snarled. "If it isn't our trusted scout. Funny how you happen to be here just in time to play hero." "I said let the child go," Sarah repeated, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Or what?" Frank laughed. "You'll shoot? Go ahead, try it. But I'll put a bullet in this kid's head before you can pull the trigger." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Sarah could hear gunfire continuing outside as Brooks' men battled the mounted outlaws. Inside the bank, time seemed suspended in a moment of perfect, deadly tension. Then Cole Younger made a mistake. Distracted by the confrontation between Sarah and the James brothers, he loosened his grip on the elderly guard. The old man broke free and lunged for a shotgun behind the counter. Everything happened at once. Younger spun and fired, killing the guard instantly. The sound of the gunshot shattered the frozen tableau. Frank James reflexively turned toward the sound, and in that split second, Sarah took her shot. Her bullet caught Frank in the shoulder, spinning him around and away from Tommy. Jesse roared in rage and turned his gun on Sarah, but she was already moving, diving behind a wooden desk as his bullet splintered the wood where she had been standing. "Run!" she shouted to the civilians. "Everyone out!" The bank customers, including Mrs. Whitman and Tommy, fled toward the door. Tommy's father started to follow, but Jesse grabbed him and pressed a gun to his head. "Nobody moves or this man dies," Jesse shouted. Outside, the gunfire was intensifying. Sarah could hear Deputy Brooks shouting orders and the sound of horses screaming as men fell. The robbery was turning into a massacre, exactly what she had feared. "Give it up, Jesse," Sarah called from behind the desk. "The building is surrounded. You're not getting out of this alive." "Maybe not," Jesse replied, his voice cold with fury. "But I'm taking as many of you with me as I can. Starting with you, you treacherous bitch." Sarah knew she had only one chance. Jesse was using the bank teller as a human shield, but his position near the counter left him partially exposed. It would be a difficult shot, requiring precision she hadn't needed since the war. She took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet took Jesse James in the chest just below the collarbone. He staggered backward, dropping his gun and releasing the teller, who immediately ran for safety. But Jesse James was tougher than most men. Despite the wound, he fumbled for a second revolver. Sarah stood up from behind the desk, her own gun trained on him. "It's over, Jesse," she said quietly. Jesse looked at her with eyes full of pain and hatred. "You think this makes you a hero? You think betraying us makes you righteous?" "I think stopping killers makes me a soldier," Sarah replied. "Same as I always was." Jesse tried to raise his second gun, but his strength was failing. The weapon fell from his fingers and clattered on the wooden floor. He slumped against the counter, blood spreading across his shirt. You were one of us," he whispered. "We trusted you." "You trusted a lie," Sarah said. "The real me never stopped fighting for justice." The sound of gunfire outside was fading. Through the bank windows, Sarah could see Deputy Brooks and his men subduing the surviving gang members. The robbery was over. As federal marshals burst through the bank door, Sarah holstered her revolver and looked around at the scene. One bank guard was dead, Frank James was wounded but alive, and Jesse James was dying from her bullet. It wasn't the clean victory she had hoped for, but it was justice nonetheless. Later, as the prisoners were being loaded into wagons and the wounded were being treated, Deputy Brooks approached Sarah. "You did good work," he said simply. "The reward money and your papers are waiting at my office." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on Tommy Wilkins, who was being reunited with his father. The boy looked up and saw her watching. "Miss Mary," he called out, running over to her. "You saved us. You're a hero." Sarah knelt down to the boy's level and smiled, despite everything that had happened. "No, Tommy. I'm just a soldier doing her job." As the sun set over Northfield, Sarah Washington stood at the train station with her bag packed and her official papers in hand. She was leaving town as a vindicated veteran, a wealthy woman, and a hero. But she was also leaving as a woman without a home, carrying the weight of necessary violence and the knowledge that justice often came at a terrible price. The train arrived, bound for California and a new life far from the violence of the frontier. As Sarah boarded, she thought about the long road that had brought her to this moment. She had been kicked out of the army for being a woman, rejected by society for being black, and forced to become a criminal to serve justice. But in the end, she had remained true to the oath she had taken as a soldier, to protect and defend the innocent, no matter the cost to herself. As the train pulled away from Northfield, Sarah Washington closed her eyes and allowed herself to rest for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was finally at peace with the woman she had chosen to become. Justice had been served, and sometimes that was enough.